Today's video is brought to you by Audible. Get your free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/MagzTV or click the link in the video description down below. G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder with Mags, and welcome to patch 1.71. Today we're going to be taking a look at the first of the new vehicles in patch 1.71, specifically in ground forces. This is the KPz-70, also known as the MBT-70. This new MBT addition to War Thunder features as the final ground forces vehicle at the end of the German tree, and as one of two new vehicles at the end of the United States ground forces tree. It is also one of the handful of new rank 6 vehicles added to the game at battle rating 8.7. Its primary armament is the 152mm XM105E5 cannon/launcher. This is a dual-purpose cannon capable of both firing tank shells or capable of launching ATGMs at targets. The tank itself is capable of holding 48 shells or missiles for this cannon on board. It also features two secondary weapons. The first and foremost is the 20mm RH202 cannon, mounted prominently on the left-hand side of the tank with 750 rounds of ammunition. This is actually very useful, and I'll get into why later. There is also a 7.62mm MG3A1 machine gun with 6,000 rounds of ammunition on board. Now, before I go into the stats of the tank, I need to let you know right now, I have not fully upgraded the tank at this point. There'll be an image on screen right now showing the current level of upgrades that I do have on the KPz-70. I feel I've unlocked enough to get a good feel for what the tank is capable of, but this is just an impressions, not a review video, so I will be revisiting this tank again once it is fully upgraded. At this point, the turret rotation speed of the KPz-70 is 30.6 degrees per second. Its vertical guidance is -10 + 20. That's 10 degrees of depression, 20 degrees of gun elevation as standard, with a 6.9 second reload. Current engine power is 1,455 horsepower. The tank itself comes in at 51.7 tons, giving it a top speed of 64 kilometers per hour with a maximum inclination of 40 degrees. Now, as I'm sure you noticed, I did not mention armor in there. I will be going over armor a little bit later in this video because it's a little bit more complex with this tank and requires a little bit to discuss. But first things first, let's cut to the chase. Is the MBT-70, KPz-70, they're the same machine, a good tank? Well, it's most certainly not a bad tank, but it is, in my opinion, if not the worst, probably in the lower two of the current rank 6 main battle tanks that have been added in this patch. Now, I will of course be explaining why, but to again put this nice and short, do you enjoy driving the Leopard 1 or the Leopard A1A1? If you do, you are going to love the MBT-70, the KPz-70. You're really going to enjoy driving this vehicle, because essentially what it is a very big, very high horsepower Leopard. This tank has virtually all the same advantages and disadvantages as the Leopard. It is extremely fast, it is extremely mobile, it is extremely maneuverable on the ground, it has a fantastic gun. It's possibly not the best gun that's actually available at rank 6 at the moment, but it's by no means horrible. It is easily, worst case scenario, third best gun in the game for ground forces. It is a kick-ass cannon. It also has exactly the same problem with survivability that the Leopard does. If you take a hit in this tank, chances are you're dead. So let's talk about the shells available to the KPz-70. First up we have the MGM-51C. This is an anti-tank guided missile, total weight 28 kilograms with a 4.72 kilogram equivalent warhead. Maximum speed 323 meters per second. This is not the fastest projectile around, but it does carry with it 431 millimeters of penetration. This is actually kind of fantastic and will drill through most vehicles in the game, guaranteed. This is also available from stock. The second of the stock rounds that are available is the M409A1 heat round. Now, this is a heat round, not a heat FS round. It's a 22 kilogram shell, 754 meters per second. TNT equivalent is 3.73 kilograms in total, and it has a maximum penetration at all ranges of 354 millimeters. Again, this is a pretty good shell. That being said, after unlocking the vehicle, I tended to use the ATGMs more. I just found them more effective. Your first unlockable shell is a smoke shell. It's a 20 kilogram projectile, 754 meters per second with a 50 gram explosive mass, and these things can be quite amusing, as well as being extremely effective at creating smoke screens in order for your tank to slip through. I have actually managed to cripple a number of light self-propelled anti-aircraft guns by drilling these into the side of their cabs. They hit with enough force, they will actually do significant damage. And last but absolutely not least, we have the XM57-8E1. This is the APFS-DS shell, the armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot shell. And once unlocked, this shell will be your bread and butter in this vehicle. It is a 9.1 kilogram shell with a 1,478 meter per second muzzle velocity. Maximum armor penetration at point blank range is 380mm, with 360mm at 500 meters and still being capable of penetrating 345mm of armor at 1 kilometer. The performance of this shell is truly excellent. However, it is worth noting that of the APFSDS shells introduced across the new vehicles in this patch, it is the slowest and has the highest rate of drop. While at short ranges sub 200 meters, this is going to make absolutely no difference for you. Long range shooting will require either a very good eye for range and drop, or usage of the rangefinder in order to accurately get shots on target. The reason for this oddly high level of drop is the mass of the projectile. At 9.1 kilograms, this is the heaviest of the APFSDS shells available in rank 6. Okay, at this point it's time to look over the armor of this tank, and we've got a little bit to cover here, as the rank 6 vehicles are a little bit more complicated than everything that comes previous. So, starters, let's have a look at the gun mantlet. Obviously the gun is 33mm of gun steel, nothing special about it there. It's flanked by a ring of rolled homogeneous armor, 305mm thick from the front. This section here is also 50mm thick from the side. It protects the base of the gun where it goes into the breech. The actual mantlet itself is 80mm thick and comes in 3 parts on the armor viewer. This is important, you'll see why in a few moments. The upper plate, 50mm thick. Front corners, we've got 38mm of armor, and it's 38mm of armor. It doesn't really matter which way you look at it, it's bugger all. Side armor, 35. Top, 12.7 on the back. This is very important, especially when you consider that the forward armor on the tank is 20mm thick. Not a huge difference between the two. What's the difference? Well, in here is a large portion of the ammo that your tank will be carrying. And 12.7mm of armor is actually fairly easy to penetrate with ground target ammunition into aircraft armed with 20mm or plus cannons. Shooting the back of the plate can completely destroy the tank. Top of the armor deck is exactly the same, 12.7 as well. You've got 8 on a thin slat across the back, and then it jumps down to 30. Side armor comes in 2 pieces, an upper and a lower, 23mm on the lower, 35mm on the armor, on the upper section of the armor. And then we go to the front plate. We have the upper front glacis is 34mm thick, the lower is 76 and down sloped. Again, we're looking at 64mm, 64 degrees on the down, 61 on the front. The armor is that thin, for the most part, it's not going to matter. But then we go into the internals. Now, as I mentioned, the internals on these tier 6 or rank 6 tanks are significantly different to the others. There's actually an inner armor layer. These armor mostly consists of composites, however, not in the 70. The 70 sub-armor is only spaced armor. It consists of a 38mm rolled homogeneous steel plate, a 127mm air gap, and then a 130mm plate on the inside. The spaced armor is effective at shutting down heat, some heat FS rounds, and ATGMs with heat warheads. However, in total, the entire thickness, as you can see at the top, details equivalent protection against kinetic energy munitions, 320mm, chemical energy munitions, 280mm. While this spaced armor sublayer will prevent the penetration of some kinetic energy rounds, such as AP rounds, and some chemical energy rounds, such as HESH, high explosive, heat, and so on, for the most part, it's actually rather unreliable. The most common rounds you'll find yourself stopping with this armor come from vehicles that are around 7.7 battle rating. These are the absolute lowest vehicles that the MBT KPz is actually capable of facing in combat. These are also the only vehicles that carry shells that, if they are using their completely stock shells, some of their upgraded shells, are low enough in the penetration values to not be able to get through. Once you start hitting battle rating 8 and into vehicles such as the T-62, their upgraded shells have the ability to go straight through this armor without question, and most of the vehicles with Heat FS shells have well in excess of 300mm of penetration and will go through your front armor as well. While ricochets here are also somewhat possible, the armor sloping is not extreme, so they are again unreliable. The spaced armor at the front of the tank is not a lot better. In fact, it's significantly worse. The angle is much better, but you're looking at 200mm for kinetic rounds, 170mm for chemical energy. A direct hit from an ATGM to the front of this tank, regardless of what is firing it, is going to go straight through, hit the fuel tank underneath, and light the tank on fire. And that fuel tank will almost always light the tank on fire on a direct hit. Underneath that plate from below, there is no defense. If anything gets access to your lower front plate, it is going to go through and rip a hole straight through the tank. And as you can see, there is some ammunition stored on the floor that is in a perfect line to hit if somebody gets access to that lower glacis, so keep that covered. Thankfully, the tank has hydraulics to hide that, so it allows you to hide one weak spot, but in reality, despite this sub-armor, the whole tank is a weak spot. This softness of the armor stands out quite clearly when you put this tank into direct comparison against the T-64A and the Chieftain Mark 10, both also introduced to rank 6 in this patch. The T-64 Alpha is capable of taking 400mm of kinetic energy to its composite armor and 450mm of chemical energy before a penetration takes place. This armor is again based around the front of the turret. The Chieftain Mark 10 substructure Stillbrew armor, on the other hand, will take 450mm of kinetic energy and 500mm of chemical energy in order to penetrate. And that's before you take into account that on the MBT-70, KPz-70, you don't actually need to defeat its armor in order to kill it. As you can see from my rather spectacular death here, simply shooting the garbage bin sized observation scopes on top of the tank will result in the explosion and fragmentation penetrating the inside of the turret. As all of the crew members sit inside of the turret, this one-shots the tank due to crew death, removing the need to even deal with the spaced armor in the first place. By now I'm sure you're starting to realise why I made the comparisons to the Leopard at the start of this video. The Leopard suffers many of these problems. It is a tank that is completely vulnerable to virtually every vehicle that it faces. It can occasionally bounce shots, but it is unreliable in doing so. It survives working on its great gun and having extremely high mobility, relying on not being shot in the first place in order to perform in a match. This is exactly how the MBT-70 and how the KPz-70, as they are the same vehicle, operate inside of War Thunder. They are almost completely reliant on not being shot in the first place in order to do well in the match, by avoiding fire, selecting good positions to engage targets from, and disengaging from combat using that mobility when it's necessary to do so. So once again we return back to that original question, is this a good tank? In my opinion, yes it is, but I enjoy driving the Leopard. If you are somebody who enjoys driving the Leopard, you are probably going to enjoy this tank too. If you're somebody who likes having a little bit of armor and a little bit of survivability and doesn't like relying on mobility in order to avoid shots, then the MBT-70, KPz-70 is likely not going to be the tank for you. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the video and thank you very much for watching. As always, if you would like to help support the channel, check out my link to my Audible trial in the video description down below. Audible is a fantastic service for all your audiobook needs. Over 180,000 titles to choose from, and that is important as the link below will get you a free trial and a free audiobook download. On the other hand, if you would like to help support the channel directly, the link to my Patreon is in the video description down below as well. Patreon is basically the lifeblood of this channel. It keeps me going more than anyone else. Big shout out to everybody who has helped support me up until this point, and a reminder that becoming a patron will get you patron status on my official Discord server. Anyways, ladies and gents, click that like button, subscribe if you want to see more, and until next time, drive smart, drive safe, and I'll catch you on the battlefield.